91. Jayanilo Premadana Karuna Prachur Heno Prabhu Kota Gela Chayataku Kaha Mora Swarup Rupa Kaha Sanatan Gaura Dasa Raghunatha Patita Bhava Kaha Mora Bhatta Juga Kaha Kaviraj Eka Kali Kota Gela Goranataraj Bashane Kuti Bo Mata Anale Pashibo Gauranga Gunera Nidhi Kotangele Pabo Say Sabba Sangira Sangi Jai Koilo Vilas Say Sangana Paya Kande Narottamadas Jayanilo Premadhana Karuna Prachur Aheno Prabhu Kota Gela Chayataku Jaya Vaishnav Thakur, Vaishnav Thakur, Vaishnav Thakur, Jaya Vaishnav Thakur. He who brought the treasure of divine love and was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Srinivasacharya gone? Where are my Sarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? And where is Krishnadas Kaviraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against the rock and enter into the fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all wonderful qualities? Being unable to obtain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees in whose association he performed his pastimes, Narottam Das simply weeps. So this is the glorious disappearance day of Srila Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji, who was the Shiksha disciple of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and the Diksha guru of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Very important member of our parampara, glorious parampara. And so I'm going to, first we'll start with his pranam mantra. And just give me a second here. Okay. So let's see, we'll do this like Pushpanjali. Namo Gaura Kisora Sakshad Vairagyamurtiye Vipulamba Rasambodhe Padambu Jayate Namaha. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji Maharaj, the spiritual master of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who is renunciation personified. He is always merged in a feeling of separation from and intense love for Krishna. So I went through this book. There's a book called Babaji Maharaj, written by Karnamrita, I believe. Karnamrita Das? Yes. Yeah. Rupa Vilas? Okay. And there's some wonderful pastimes in there. And we're not going to, of course, read the whole thing. But I'll summarize some of them. You have it? All right. You see, I was wrong. I was right. Here it is. So, when I was reading through this book, it's not that long. I read through the whole thing. I kept thinking of this verse from the 11th canto. And so we can chant that together, and I'll read the translation. There's actually no purport that was given in the 11th canto. But it's practically, there's a bunch of vignettes. It's one after another. And practically every one of them is in this mood. So we'll chant this, which let's see. Sorry. Okay. This is 11:26. This is in the middle of the Uddhava Gita. Tato duksangam utsrijya satsu sajjeta buddhiman santa evasya chindanti mano vyasangam muktibihi. Tato duksangam utsrijya satsu sajjeta buddhiman santa evasya chindanti mano vyasanga muktibihi. I'll just read the translation. So Krishna says to Uddhava, an intelligent person should therefore reject all bad association and instead take up the association of saintly devotees whose words cut off the excessive attachment on one's mind. And just to give a Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Shri Parampara. So just to give a little context, this verse comes right after the Aila Gita. The Aila Gita is actually King Pururava's song of renunciation. He got completely infatuated with Urvashi, the most beautiful dancing girl of the heavenly planets, was sent down by Indra to break his meditation, because again he thought he was getting too strong, he might take his position. That's kind of one of the things he does. So he got into a whole relationship with this Urvashi, and eventually, I won't tell the whole story, she left him in a lurch, suddenly, and he was just, he couldn't forget her. And he kept meditating on her, and finally she agreed, okay, one day a year you can be with me, like this. It was on and on like this. And finally he saw that this is crazy, and he has this song of renunciation, which is really heavy. It says for how many years did I serve the sweet lips of Urvashi? I'm no better than a worm in stool, just trying to enjoy this material body, on and on like that. It comes before this. And then Krishna says this this verse, and the idea that struck me was how the sharp words of the saint, the sadhu, he really does a service by speaking very strongly to the disciple, and for the purpose of cutting off chindandi by his sharp words, the manovyasangam, which are the excessive attachment in one's mind. And so Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji personified that. And I'm just going to give a little summary of his life here, which I outlined. And just give me a second here. Okay. So Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji was appeared sometime in the 1830s. There's no exact date that we know, according to this. In the district of Faridapur, in East Bengal, which is now Bangladesh. And he was the son of a Vaishya, most probably named Vangshidas, we don't know for sure. Some say that Vangshidas was in Gaura Kisora Dasa's name when he was a householder, but in any case, he stayed in household life for about 20 years, and his wife died, and he was, of course, raised as a Vaishnava, and he then left his business and went to Vrindavan, and he took initiation from Sri Bhagavatam Dasa Babaji. There's a wonderful book, by the way, that was compiled by Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, O.B.L. Kapoor, all about the saints of Braja. Have you ever seen that book? I read that once on Navadri Parakram. It was an amazing thing. I took that one book with me. And it describes so many different Babajis, real Babajis, who stayed in Vrindavan. That was the way in most of the renunciants, serious Vaishnavas who really they would take Babaji and they would go to Vrindavan. They weren't traveling around and preaching like the sannyas like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati did. So there were some very serious and renounced and wonderfully realized Babajis there, and he took initiation from this one, and who was the foremost disciple of Jagannath Das Babaji, so you can imagine how exalted he was. Then he started doing parakram of Vrajamandal, of Vrindavan parakram, and he did that continuously for about 30 years. You can imagine. I don't know if you've ever done Vrindavan parakram, just doing it once a year, it's strenuous. So this was the first, an indication of a tremendous renunciation and austerity. And then he went to Gaura He went to Navadvip and associated with the other great souls there, and especially Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He was very attracted to the discourses of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur had built his Svananda Sukhada Kunj, which is his wonderful house. When you go to Mayapur and you go on Parakram, you visit that house. And it's right on the Ganges, right? And the Bhagirati? Jalangi, the tributary. And there was established there a little bhajan kutir for Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji. You can go and visit that. And he would sometimes stay there. And he loved listening to the discourses of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and they spent much time together. And he was awarded, actually in Vrindavan, it looks like, I forget, if he was awarded the title of Bhajananandi. We know it as a description, but it's also, you're awarded that title. Bhajananandi means one who is always blissfully engaged in bhajan, And famously, we just heard, the real Goshtyananandi is the one who's preaching. The best are the bhajananandis who preach. In other words, it's not that they don't do bhajan anymore. They do bhajan and it overflows, and they want to share it, and they want to, do what Lord Chaitanya described, spread the glories throughout the world even. So it's described after he had received this honor. Now this is the theme of this book, that he was highly honored as a greatly realized soul, and people would come to see him. But he never wanted any honor, and he would practically run from it, So he never endeavored for even a modicum, that's a little bit of material sense gratification, and totally disapproved of the secret material desires of pseudo-renunciants. There's a common misspelling from Prabhupada's original book before it was corrected. There's no word renunciate. The word is renunciant. So you can put that in your file. So he was extremely renounced. In 1897, when he was in his 60s, at a time when the Yoga Pit, the birth site of Lord Chaitanya, was revealed by the exertions of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gaura Kisora proceeded to Navadvip Dham from Vrindavan under the instruction of Jagannath Das Babaji, who would also spend a time there, may have been there at that time. And from this time until his disappearance, Gaura Kisora remained in Navadvip, living in different villages and realizing they're non-different from Vrindavan. And it shows his austerity. He would live in such a way he wouldn't be dependent on anyone. You know, that's the idea. So he would gather dry wood that's discarded, and he would use that as a fire to cook simple rice or something. He would wear rejected clothes, and where did he live? There was some vacant spot that had been built that he would live in for a while, and he would here in 1897, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that's when he constructed the Swananda Sukrita Kunj, and on Godruma, which represents Kirtan, moderate 2-story house when you can visit it, and there was a place. Let's see, it describes here, where he would, as I mentioned, a little place where Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji could stay and do his bhajan. And the Thakur often cited the behavior of Gaura Kisora as a perfect example of nirapeksha, which means indifference. Indifference to fame, indifference to material sense gratification. Practically he describes his diet. He would eat rice that had been soaked in water. Sometimes he would eat the mud on the bank of the Ganges, and gradually he lost his sight. He wasn't able to see, and Bhaktivinoda tried to establish a balanced diet, but he refused. He didn't want any kind of service, even after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And I'm going to read that nice little pastime, how that happened from the Lilamrita. He wouldn't take any service. He absolutely refused to take any service from anyone, and if they insisted, he said, "Oh, I'll just go leave." I'll jump into the Ganges. He was so determined not to take any service. What was his possessions? Tulsi beads he wore around his neck, and he had a mala. He also kept a few books, such as Narottam Das Thakur's Partana and Prema Bhakti Chandrika. Now, I was interested to read this because Prabhupada presents him as illiterate. And maybe that was most obvious when he lost his sight. He wasn't reading, of course, but I don't know, maybe he had these books with him, only a couple of books. Sometimes he wore torn cloth, sometimes he went naked. He was so even unaware of what he was wearing. He was not a learned Sanskrit scholar, but everything he spoke was completely according to Shastra and embodied the Shastra conclusions. Never willing to accept any kind of service. I just wanted to read this little paragraph here. He exhibited the highest standard of devotion to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, and because of his exemplary character, he was recognized as the personification of the deepest degree of separation from Lord Krishna. That's why we sing Sakshad Vairagyamurtaye. That's what that means, the personification of Vipralamba Rasambodhe, always absorbed in the rasa of separation. And Vairagya, detachment personified. And so this renunciation and this extreme example of separation from Krishna distinguished him from most other Vaishnavas and spread the luster of his lotus feet. So this is just a little quote where he, from Bhaktisiddhanta's wrote something he wrote about Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji. Many young, clever, old, learned, foolish, proud, and reasonable persons came into contact with Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji. Yet they couldn't realize his real identity. This is indeed the mystic opulence of the devotees of Krishna. Many persons came to consult with Srila Gaura Kisora Prabhu about their insignificant desires. They would always get suggestions, but those suggestions were usually the cause of their disappointment. You'll see when we tell a few of these stories. Innumerable persons accepted the Babaji dress and acted as devotees of the Lord, but actually they were impostors, far away from being real sadhus. This is described elsewhere, how Lord Chaitanya's preaching, and all of the devotees that came in his way, Narottam Das Thakur and the others, there was a whole, and of course the Goswamis. Over the centuries, a couple of centuries after Lord Chaitanya disappeared, there arose as Sahajiyas and all of these owls and the bowels and different called Upasampradayas who tried to take advantage of this philosophy of Lord Chaitanya, and especially the attraction of the conjugal ras, and get cheap followers, get some donations, have illicit relations on the side. It was very common. And so Gaura Kisora was dealing with a lot of that at this time. It was by Bhaktivinoda Thakur's great efforts that the strict following was restarted, and of course his son, who established this society. Bhaktivinoda Thakur never established an organization, but he wrote many books, and he preached wonderfully, and of course the Yoga Preet he found, and a temple was built there. But it was great effort to kind of bring back the great honor of Lord Chaitanya's movement and his teachings, which of course, and Srila Prabhupada took it all over the world. So, let's see, he's writing here. So his renunciation predominated. Even when he obtained very opulent offering, his renunciation predominated. And he goes on, this is another quote from Bhaktisiddhanta. Srila Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji never displayed any distaste for those persons who were inimical to him. He also never manifested any special affection for those very dear to him. He would often express himself saying, "In this material world, I am all alone in my service to Lord Krishna. Everyone is worshipable by me." Many materialistic, foolish persons masquerading as devotees, imitating pure devotion, would come and surround him. They would consider that they were the dear object of his affection, while they engaged their minds in so many worldly sense objects. Gaura Kisora would never display any intention of driving them away, and also no symptoms of compromising attitude. But when they asked for instruction or advice, and he gave them these powerful words, oftentimes they would make it say, "Well, they didn't want to." They realized they couldn't exploit. So I have a few. Let's see, where are these? There's many. Okay. Give me a second here. Okay. So this is just his initiation of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So he arrived there in 1897, which is shortly after Bhaktivinoda Thakur built his Swananda Sukunda Kunj, and he stayed there and associated very closely with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. At Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's urging, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Bimala Prasad, approached Srila Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji for initiation in the month of Magh of the year 1900. Now that's early in the year, that's like a cold month, right? Month of Magh, yeah. Srila Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji expressed reluctance to accept him. He had no other disciples, he hadn't taken any disciples. He expressed reluctance, knowing Siddhanta Saraswati to be a great scholar. He'd already written the Surya Siddhanta, which was, the translation commentary on it. So he was a great scholar. Finally, when Siddhanta Saraswati pleaded with him for initiation, Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji replied, "Mahaprabhu will be asked. I'll ask Mahaprabhu. And if he gives permission, your desire will be fulfilled." So this is like, as a matter of fact, I can ask Lord Chaitanya. So that's what he said. A few days later, Siddhanta Saraswati approached him again and asked, "What was Mahaprabhu's order?" Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji replied, "Oh, I forgot to ask." The third time Babaji Maharaj was requested, he replied, "I asked, I did not receive command of Mahaprabhu." Siddhanta Saraswati then stood up, his heart breaking, and he said, "You, Lord Chaitanya and Srila Gaura Kisora, are both worshippers of Krishna, the crest jewel of the Bauchis. Therefore, why will you take mercy on someone dedicated to ordinary morality like me?" In his pastimes as the exemplary teacher, Mahaprabhu has given instructions on the worship of Krishna, the crest jewel of the Bauchis. Therefore, why will he give the command to take mercy on me? But Karuna na hoile kandiya kandiya prani na rakibe ar. If there is no mercy, weeping and weeping, I shall sustain my life no more. If I do not receive your mercy, I do not see any need in holding unto life. And this is a line from a song by Narottam Das Thakur, I believe. After thus indicating, close quote, after thus indicating his readiness to take his own life, Siddhanta Saraswati began to cry. Srila Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji's heart was melted to see this, so he told him to take bath in the Saraswati, then come back to him. At the time of initiation, he gave Siddhanta Saraswati this name, Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Dayata Das, which means Varshabhanavi Devi is Radharani, the daughter of King Vrishabhanu. And Dayata is the beloved, so it's a name for Krishna. Vrishabhanavi Devi Dayata, the beloved of Radharani, the daughter of Vrishabhanu. So he's the servant of Radharani. And Satsvara Maharaj reveals how this is similar to Narottam Dasa's taking initiation from Lokanath Das Goswami, also being his sole disciple. Lokanath was very reluctant, so it was, I think, a whole year Narottam Das was doing menial service in his ashram, cleaning up his place where he passed, and finally Lokanath accepted him as his sole disciple. So then, there's a few vignettes that I'd like to share, illustrative. Okay. Okay, that one I did. All right, so this is typical. This is entitled "The Materialist Grains." A lawyer named Bhattacharya came to visit Babaji Maharaj. He was living in the vicinity and had contracted a certain caste Goswami on a monthly basis to supply him food, to supply the Goswami food. When the lawyer approached Babaji Maharaj, he was asked, "What arrangement do you have for your foodstuffs?" The lawyer replied, "I have arranged to receive my foodstuffs in the house of a certain Vaishnavas and Brahmins." Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji then said, "Give up eating their cooked rice." So this is one of the things, that he had this amazing ability. It was almost like he was omniscient. He was in touch with the super soul. So even though his sight was failing, he was able to see exactly the character of persons who were even at a distance. "Give up eating their cooked rice. You should cook for yourself and eat that. Those persons from whom you are accepting food grains," and this is caste Goswami, "eat meat and maintain their service to Lord Chaitanya in devious ways. Their activities are most offensive because they know that what they're doing is wrong. Those persons have no fear of an offense they create to the Supreme Lord, should never even be spoken to, otherwise devotional service will be destroyed." So this is typical of his uncompromising words. And sometime later, the lawyer brought several sweets and offered them to Srila Gaura Kisora. He prayerfully requested Babaji Maharaj to accept his offering. Babaji Maharaj said, "I never accept sweets." Babaji Maharaj, "Then there is nothing higher than accepting food that the Lord has directly accepted." Babaji Maharaj retorted, "Whoever eats fish is like a prostitute. If someone has perverted desires and offers foodstuff to Lord Chaitanya, those preparations can never be accepted as the prasadam of the Supreme Lord, because the Lord does not partake of them. Whoever is not a sincere devotee of the Lord can't understand what a non-devotee is. Even if one offers food to the Supreme Lord, if one has perverted intentions, then that offering is never accepted." So this is typical of his exchanges with people who would come. So here's something how Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji loved Mayapur Dham. Babaji Maharaj exhibited an unmatched, uncompromising spirit toward anything opposing the real conclusions of bhakti. He was above all mundane thought, and one can't possibly understand why he acted as he did, unless one rigidly follows in the footsteps of the Paramahamsa devotees of the Lord. So we should not be surprised that some who had his audience hundreds of times were never blessed with this special grace, because he could see who was sincere and who wasn't. And this book is mostly filled with those who were, faking. They weren't sincere. Of course, he highly revered Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I remember this one pastime, you remember this famous, where, I forget the year, where Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati went to Mayapur, I think the Yoga Pit, and he took a vow to chant 1 billion names, which you multiply it out, it takes 8 or 9 years, chanting 300,000 names a day, just like Haridas Thakur. 1 billion names. So he was so rigid in his vow, you know. He would sit and chant, and he was sitting under a little thatched, covering. And the rains would come, pouring rain would come leaking through. He'd just take his umbrella and keep chanting. So one day, Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji shows up early in the morning. It had been dark, and everything. And this is when he apparently lost his sight. And now you go to Mayapur, go to Navadvip, there's so many boats you can take over, In those days, there was nothing like that. And so Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was offered his pranams and his dandavats and said, how did you get here? How were you able to, Well, someone took my hand and took me. Who's going to take his hand, in the middle of the night like that? So somehow Krishna, Lord Chaitanya came and brought Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji to visit his disciple. And when he heard of these austerities that Bhaktisiddhanta was performing, he said, oh, he's just like Raghunath Das. He's exhibiting the kind of renunciation of Raghunath Das. It's amazing because they were both extremely austere and renounced. And the difference was that Gaura Kisora was a Babaji. At one time he was encouraged by Bhaktivinoda Thakur to go to Calcutta to get some treatment for his eyes, said, I'll never go to the material world, Calcutta, But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati went there. After he completed his vow, he went to Calcutta and started the Gaudiya Math, and that taking of sannyas, which means traveling and preaching. And Babaji doesn't travel and preach. They go to Vrindavan, they do bhajan. And Bhaktisiddhanta, of course, was, completely expert in bhajan. But he wanted to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya that this would be spread everywhere. And he knew that it wasn't just in India. There had been preachers, but they just said, oh, this Priti Vityachi means just in India. But Priti is the world, is the earth. And so he took the trouble. He had this one devotee, God, my memory is going, who wrote that book? Oh, Dr. Sanyal, about Lord Chaitanya. Very wonderful. I have a digital copy if you're interested in reading it. And very eruditely done. Lord Chaitanya's early Leela. There was supposed to be a volume 2. I don't know if it was ever done. But and that was expressly to be appealing to the English in England. And this book, when it was done, that was printed, and he supplied money, to some of his leading disciples to go and try to do something in London, And they went and they were supported, and everything. Unlike Srila Prabhupada, went alone with no money. But they failed after a few, they met some of the lords and ladies, and everything, but they came back and they hadn't really been able to start it. There was a few disciples in England. So, but Bhaktisiddhanta was very keen on that, and he was always eager to have, and he saw Prabhupada's, ability. He said, oh, one day he will do everything. And, Prabhupada eventually left India, and the rest is history. So, let's see. Yeah, so some people had his audience so many times, but practically he found they were practically all insincere to really just come and stay with him. Even at one point, he was so sick of all of the people coming, so he asked one a friend, build me a little latrine and I'll stay there, and I'll do my bhajan there so I won't be bothered, And they said, oh, really? Yes, so. Uh-oh. I'm sorry about that. That's my ringtone. Forgot to turn this thing off. I haven't been bringing it. All these calls, I get so many calls from. Yeah, right. They're just trying to, medical thing, And I blocked the number. But they're smart. They call from a different number. They have a way of going different numbers. Like he's called. Anyway, forgive me. So, where was I? The latrine, yeah. So he started doing his bhajan in the latrine, and one fella comes and was petitioning him, and said, all right, if you really want my mercy, you come stay here. And give up everything, give up your house and just stay and chant with me, So he backed out and went home. He wasn't willing to be that renounced, All right. Oh, here's a nice little section about displaying ecstatic symptoms. On one occasion, Babaji Maharaj was sitting within his bhajan kutir in Navadvip Dham, loudly chanting Hare Krishnas. Others persons who had assembled there were also chanting. At this time, someone came and began to display different ecstatic symptoms, such as crying. This was very common at the time. Some of the assembled devotees said, "Oh, that person has attained the highest stage of devotional ecstasy by chanting the glories of the Lord." But Gaura Kisora immediately requested the man to leave. Some of the onlookers became disturbed, and they also left. Babaji Maharaj commented, "One who has actually attained love of God will never display the symptoms thereof, but will keep them hidden from the general populace. A chaste wife becomes very embarrassed when she has to show any part of her body in public, as she keeps her body thoroughly covered. In the same way, when one has real devotion for the Lord and becomes elevated to love of God, he always feels embarrassed to exhibit symptoms of ecstasy and always keeps such symptoms hidden." So he cites Lord Chaitanya when he met Ramananda Roy. It's a famous passage in the 8th chapter of Madhya Lila. And so immediately they embraced each other. They were showing ecstatic symptoms. But there were all of these kind of smarter Brahmins along with Ramananda Roy. And when Lord Chaitanya saw them, he restricted it because he didn't want to display it. But there were so many fakers who saw, well, people are so attracted by this and they don't know, and so they'll become, they'll be able to get followers, and with the followers comes some money. So they would learn how to Bhadni Maharaj loves to tell the story. A classic thing, and Prabhupada again and again talks about this, especially in the second canto, which he wrote when he was in India, about how this Bhagavat Saptaha, imitating the 7 days where Pariksit sitting, So they'll have a big mela, and so such and such Babaji, very learned in the Shastra, is going to read, the Bhagavatam, and people know, oh, that means he's going to read Rasa Lila, So people come; they come sometimes by the thousands, and so this fellow was reading some passage of the Rasa Panchanjaya, and he started crying, And afterward, he got off the stage and he took these chilies out of his nose. He had gotten this was his technique to show the tears coming, fooliness in public. So this happened in a different way. Prabhupada also experienced when he came to America, and he saw there was yoga studios, and there were some famous, yogis who would come, and charging $35, which was a lot in 1965, for the mantra, some simple mantra, one word mantra. In other words, exploiting, And one of them has got this thing in Oregon. It was like even to the point of threatening murder. It was horrible. Anyway, Prabhupada understood that, and he would always criticize, and said, "Yeah, I'll tell you later about it." So this is what Prabhupada had to contend with, and in India, you can imagine, they're a dime a dozen, So a lot of the preaching of Gaura Kisora is in exposing this hypocrisy of looking like a great sadhu and getting the dress, but actually exploiting and having even illicit relations on the side and so forth. So let's see. Gaura Kisora, this one, the sharp words of a sadhu. This is this verse. Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji always gave beneficial instructions to persons who approached him with faith and humility, no matter what their spiritual status. On one such occasion, a seeker went to Babaji Maharaj to hear topics concerning the Supreme Lord, but he heard some harsh words from him instead. The seeker therefore resolved to never go near Babaji Maharaj again. After some time, however, having been stricken with a distressed and troubled mind, he suddenly returned to see Babaji Maharaj. Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji, instantly realizing the reason for his depression, told him, "Oh, you've left the association of devotees where topics about Krishna are discussed, and now you're living in a secluded place and performing solitary worship of Krishna. When one hears the topics of the Lord in the company of devotees, then one becomes freed from Maya's net of illusion." This is very important, because the tendency sometimes is to go alone. "Oh, I'll do my solitary bhajan." But you have to be very advanced to be able to do that. Otherwise you fall down for sure. But if one performs worship of the Lord in a secluded place, not in association with devotees, one becomes caught by the illusory energy. As a consequence, instead of topics about the Lord possessing the heart, mundane subject matters will occupy it instead. The seeker replied, "I thought it better to reside in a secluded place and perform my own individual worship than to become disturbed by hearing the sharp words of a sadhu." So he's like, insulting him now. Babaji Maharaj replied, "Please take note that those sadhus who speak sharp words to drive away the witch of illusory energy are actually the only real devotees of Krishna and friends of the living entities." This is why I read this verse. With those sharp words, they cut the desires away. Gaura Govinda Maharaj was known to do this, and the devotees were very thankful for it. The conditioned living being experiences the distressful quarreling of his wife and close relatives and is rudely treated by them until death. We're just reading about this, King Puranjan, remember? Yet he never desires to leave their association. On the other hand, he absorbs himself in trying to appease and serve them. But when a devotee of the Lord, who is always desirous of the living entity's ultimate welfare, chides him just once with instructions meant to drive away Maya, then the conditioned entity immediately makes plans to leave the saintly person for his entire life. If you actually want to perform devotional service properly, then you must accept the harsh language of the sadhu as the medicine by which Maya can be given up. By this one can obtain the necessary spiritual advancement to successfully chant the holy name. Now this we experience actually in reading Srila Prabhupada's books. Sometimes it's not easy to read Prabhupada's books because he's not compromising anything. And our misconceptions and our illusions are being challenged. And so we we can always put the book down. But in doing that, we're losing the association of the great sadhu who's helping us. So that willingness, coming to class and hearing the truth as it is, sometimes it's painful. It's just like you have a disease, right? We have the disease of Maya. And so, in the disease, sometimes the treatment is very difficult to stand, but you have to do it in order to get better. So with that understanding, then one will surrender to the words of the great souls. It's their mercy that they take the trouble to do that, actually. That was Prabhupada's great mercy on us. Of course, he had, it's always time, place, and circumstance, and candidate. So when Prabhupada was preaching, he would preach strongly, but he would also spend hours with them personally and encouraging, and so it's a skill. All right, one or two more of these. Oh, here. Okay, this one we'll end with this one. Renunciation for Krishna's pleasure and false renunciation. A married man present during Babaji Maharaj's conversation with the newly wedded husband. A married man present during Babaji Maharaj's conversation with the newly wedded husband, that's the previous one, inquired from the Paramahamsa as follows. We see that there are many Vaishnavas living with their wives who perform devotional service to Lord Hari. Will any benefit accrue to such persons? The Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji replied, the living entity is the eternal servant of Krishna. But when the conditioned soul looks upon his wife and sons, he simply sees their material forms. The conditioned soul. If one does not have the eye of devotion, one can never perceive his real identity as the eternal servant of Krishna. The bound souls always have the inclination to enjoy their wives and children. These days, the living entities do not like to hear the topics of the Supreme Lord or to get the association of the Lord's devotees. If one does not attain the spiritual energy given by the chanting of the holy name of the Lord, then one will become attracted by his wife and offspring. Then again, some persons feign detachment from their wives, children, and sense pleasures. This kind of external renunciation is like the renunciation of the monkeys. Marketa vairagya. And then a little insert here from the author, who are not actually renounced, although they apparently eschew clothing, proper shelter, and other trappings of sensory emolument. The abnegation of the monkey-like renunciants is simply a pretense. The genuine Vaishnava will never maintain an attitude of sense gratification towards his wife. Rather, he will always regard himself as the servant of Krishna and the bona fide guru. Those actually desirous of performing Hari Bhajan, worship of Krishna, but in whose hearts the weeds of material desires grow, and who are unable to give up excessive attachment to wife and children, should also come and hear from the pure devotees, chant Hare Krishna, and perform congregational chanting. In this way, they can quickly become detached from the inclination to enjoy their wives and children. They will gradually realize that if one completely surrenders to Krishna, then one will attain all auspiciousness. As long as one remains in bodily consciousness, one cannot obtain the mercy of Krishna. The extension of bodily consciousness is seen in the affection displayed for one's wife and offspring. And yet one who leaves the association of his wife because of being thoroughly distressed in mind and continues to seek happiness for his own mind and body is not a real renunciant. The distinctive feature of the renunciation of the devotee of Krishna is its not being diverted from him in any way. A real renunciant accepts whatever is favorable for the Lord's satisfaction and rejects whatever is unfavorable. And this would be appropriate to quote Rupa Goswami's famous verse about yukta vairagya. Anasaktasya vishayan yataham upayunjata nirbandha krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagya muchyate. Without attachment, using the things of this world, and that includes family members, if possible, engaging them in the service of Krishna. So without, material attachment. This is called yukta vairagya, and it's favorable for another. On the other hand, you have palgu vairagya. Palgu really means weak and inauthentic. Prapanchikataya buddhya hari sambandhi vastu nak mumukchubi parityago vairagyam palgu kachite. This is the so-called renunciation of the impersonalist. So prapanchikataya buddhya, it means they have the mentality of seeing as material even those things that are directly related to Krishna. Hari sambandhi vastunak, those things that are related to Hari. Mumukshubi parityago, desiring liberation, not desiring love of Krishna, but desiring liberation. Parityago means giving up everything, supposedly. But that's impossible. And that's, aruha kuchena param padadada. By great effort, you may become Brahman realized, a few, by really repression of the senses. Because without just imagine what it's like. Most of us haven't come from the Mayavadi camp, but to try to be renounced means self-controlled, without the deity, without the holy name, without the holy sangha of the devotees, without the prasadam, without the kirtan. How is that possible? There's so much pressure, right, for the senses to engage, and so they come down from their so-called realization and they engage in welfare activity. Or worse, some material activity. So our Lord Chaitanya's movement is characterized by vairagya vidya, nija bhakti yoga. So that vairagya is very important, and Gaura Kisora Babaji personified that, vairagya murti. But it has to be done in the context of increasing our raga for Krishna. We don't want to give up that raga; we want to increase that more and more. So that's done by engaging as much as possible the things of this world in Krishna's service, and that includes one's family. That was Prabhupada's, preaching for his Grihastha disciples. The Grihastha ashram, it means it's an ashram. The main focus of the life is advancing in Krishna consciousness. So, and then he quotes a verse from Raghunath Das Goswami, Lord Chaitanya's Chaitanya Charitamrita, preaching to Raghunath Das Goswami, Markata Vairagya Nakar Loka Dekana. You should not make yourself a show bottle devotee and become a false renunciant, Markata Vairagi. For the time being, enjoy the material world in a befitting way and do not become attached to it. So this was before Raghunath Das renounced everything and came to Lord Chaitanya. So he stayed there and then eventually he escaped. Rajendranath Prabhu, do you want to tell us something about Gaura Kisora? How do you, yeah. We have the mic? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Before he left,
It's on.
Before he left, he made a statement that after I leave the body,
Oh, yes.
then you should drag me down the street.
Yeah.
And after he left his body, there was some Babaji there. All right, that's what he said. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Now, and there was a little scuffle there about, they all wanted to take his body because
And have the Samadhi tomb because,
he's famous, as you mentioned, in Calcutta. Even in Calcutta, he was famous.
Yeah.
So they were, so anyway, so they wanted his body to be at their mat. Money will come,
Samadhi tomb.
So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he heard about this, so he came. And he said that he said to everyone there, and actually there was a policeman there as well.
Yes,
because,
constable, yeah.
and so he said, I'm the only disciple of Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji, so I should take his body and I'll build a samadhi for him. And they said, you're just a brahmachari. And he said, anybody here that has not had sex, they were all Babajis, supposed to be renounced, that has not had sex in the past year, you can touch his body. Actually, anybody in the last 6 months, 3 months, anybody in the last 3 days who has not touched a woman for illicit sex, you can take his body. And the policeman said, well, how will you know if they're telling the truth? I'll accept their word, but if they're lying, be careful. And everybody, all of them, put their heads down and walked
Turned
away.
turned back, turned away.
Amazing. That's shocking. So then, of course, he took the body and
he took it, honored it properly.
Samadhi.
Yeah. Thank you for that's a very important pastime.
You reminded me of one of the instructions he gave to his only disciple when you said the father and son tried taking him to Calcutta so that he could get medicine for his failing eyesight, which turned into blindness. And he said, I'll never Kolkata. I'll never go to the kingdom of Kali, which is what I believe Calcutta means, Kali. So anyway, he gave 3 instructions to his disciple. I only remember 2 of them. Maybe Ramapani remembers the 3rd. But one was, don't ever go to Calcutta. And you yourself said that the first... Don't go to hell, which is Calcutta. So you yourself said the first thing he did after he finished his vow of chanting and he took sannyasa and then he went to Calcutta. But he explained, I'm not in Calcutta. I'm always in the Holy Dham doing the service of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His preaching is his intimate service. And then another one was, don't ever take any disciples. Well, he took 60,000 disciples. Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur, 60,000 disciples. So, whoa, sounds like a Maha but he never considered himself the guru, or they were his disciples. He was their servant, dasasmi. He was serving them in the service of his guru and the Lord. And I can't remember the other one. But
another order that he disobeyed. I mean,
he knew the understanding, like drag my body through the streets of Navadip, where the dust will purify my sinful. He said, Bhaktisiddhanta said, I'm not so foolish to be misled by the words directed toward the materialist. This personality, Lord Chaitanya himself would put him upon his head and carry him, just as he did Haridas Thakur when he passed away. His humility, as Vijay Prabhu said. And you mentioned that little kutir, it's still there in Godrumadweep, Bhakti Vinod Thakur's home. They have his picture there, So when it's right by the wall, the boundary wall, but when it was made for him, he insisted that the door would be facing the wall, where there's only like a foot or 2 foot max, to get out. He didn't want people
People
coming up
in.
and seeing. He would just chant in his little bhajan kuta there and come out for the guitar and what have you.
He was so much averse to the fame, that the fame is a big allurement for the materialist. And he would, that was the whole thing behind the latrine and all of these different things. But people would, those who would come anyway, he would give them the straight sauce. I mean, this book is practically filled with incidents like that, where people would come and they would seem to be sincere, but there was always, and he was able to tell, don't let him come anymore. He's having this relationship with, how do you know? Sweet soul. His visual sight, his physical sight was gone, but he could see more than anybody.
Can I just one other little nectar drop
Please.
on one of the pastimes
Please.
you shared? If you insist on trying to serve me, I'll go and kill myself in the Ganga. And he actually then ran off and
Yes,
he jumped in the
that's right.
Jalanga.
Yeah.
And he wasn't seen for
45 days, I remember.
Yeah, over a month and a half.
Yeah.
And finally came back and he said, one cannot attain the shelter of Lord Chaitanya's lotus feet by killing himself, giving up his body in that way. So, but I insist, do not
serving.
do not
Yeah.
consider attempting to serve me.
Amazing.
I think Bhakti Siddhanta says what he talked about. He said that anybody that desires to be served,
Oh, no.
Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that anybody that desires to be served, this is an evil mentality.
Amazing.
All right. Well, let's digest that one. Give it. All right. So we're going to meet at 11:50, without being late, for the nice Pushpanjali, and then we'll have kirtan and Kadashi Prasad. All glories to Srila Gaura Kisora Dasa Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. If someone would like to remind me by texting, I will bring over the remainder of these